I knew something was wrong long before she packed her bags. I stayed quiet, moved every asset out of reach, and waited. She thought she was leaving with everything. She had no idea the game was already over, and I was the one who ended it. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, thank you. My name is Michael Carter, 36 years old, and up until recently, I thought my life was on a solid track. I had my own business, a decent home, and a marriage that, from the outside, seemed just fine. People probably assumed we were one of those couples who never fought, who had it all figured out. What they didn't know was that silence in a marriage can be far louder than shouting. It started as a feeling I couldn't quite shake, like hearing a faint ticking in the walls at night. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it didn't belong there. My wife's smile began to change, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough that I did. It was shorter, tighter, like she was rationing it. The casual touches stopped, the easy laughter faded, and even her footsteps in the hallway seemed lighter, like she was moving through the house without wanting to leave a trace. I told myself not to overthink it. People go through phases. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe it was work. But deep down, my gut, the same gut that had saved me from more than one bad business deal, was telling me this was different. Something was shifting, and it wasn't in my favor. Nights became the hardest. We would sit in the same room, the television filling the air with noise neither of us cared about, while she stared at her phone and I stared at her reflection in the black frame of the screen. It felt like living in a painting that someone had started to erase, stroke by stroke. And in the quiet moments, I could almost feel her mind somewhere else entirely. I didn't have proof of anything yet, but I knew enough to start paying attention. I've learned in life that the worst storms don't announce themselves with thunder. They arrive quietly, building strength while you're too busy convincing yourself the sky is still clear. If life teaches you anything, it's that trouble rarely kicks the door open. It just slides in quietly, finds a seat in the corner, and waits for you to notice. That's exactly how it happened with her. Her work hours suddenly became elastic. Some days she came home early, other days she arrived long after dinner had gone cold. She started dressing differently too, with a little more care, a little more polish, as if every day was some kind of unspoken interview. At first, I told myself it was nothing, maybe she just wanted to feel good about herself. But then came the phone. That phone might as well have been a vault. It never left her side. It was either in her hand, in her pocket, or under her pillow like a toddler clinging to a favorite blanket. If it lit up, she tilted the screen away from me so fast it was like she was guarding state secrets. The strangest part wasn't the secrecy. It was the performance of normalcy. She still asked me about my day, still laughed at the right times, still cooked dinner once in a while. But there was a hollowness under it all, like a beautiful cake baked without sugar. From a distance, you'd think it was perfect. Up close, it didn't taste right. I didn't confront her. That would have been too easy for her to wriggle out of. Instead, I started doing what I do best, watching. I've spent years in business meetings reading people's faces to figure out if they were bluffing, lying, or just plain clueless. And now, that same skill was coming in handy in my own home. The more I watched, the more I saw. She started taking calls in the kitchen and speaking in a softer tone, the kind you use when you're saying something you don't want overheard. Sometimes she'd step outside entirely, claiming the signal was better. I knew better. One night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how weird it was that two people could sleep a foot apart and still be on different planets. I didn't have proof yet, but the signs were stacking up. And just like in poker, the longer I played, the more I realized her tells weren't as subtle as she thought. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday where nothing interesting usually happens. I came home earlier than expected, thinking I might actually surprise her for once. Instead, she surprised me. I walked in quietly, not because I was sneaking, but because I didn't want to break the rare silence in the house. That's when I heard it, her voice, low and deliberate, drifting in from the kitchen. I couldn't hear every word, but the ones I caught were enough to make my stomach tighten. They weren't the kind of words you use when you're planning a vacation or catching up with an old friend. She spoke in that careful tone, the one people use when they're balancing on the edge of a secret. It was so soft I had to lean slightly closer to catch it, but before I could make sense of it, her voice dropped even lower. My instincts screamed at me to step back, so I did. I went upstairs without making a sound, my mind buzzing like a neon sign. I didn't know exactly what she was talking about, but I knew it wasn't good. And here's the thing, once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. It sticks in your brain like gum on a shoe, refusing to let go. That night at dinner, she acted as if nothing had happened. She asked about my day, smiled at the right times, even laughed when I made a sarcastic remark about the neighbors' never-ending lawn renovations. But it all felt staged, like I was sitting across from an actress in a play I hadn't agreed to watch. I didn't bring it up. Not yet. The smartest thing I could do was let her think I was completely in the dark. In poker, you don't show your cards before you have to. And right now, I wasn't ready to put mine on the table. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan above me, I realized I was no longer wondering if something was wrong. I was wondering how long it had been going on without me noticing. And worse, how far she was willing to take it. There's a point in every sinking ship where you stop bailing water and start looking for the lifeboats. That's where I was. I didn't have the full picture of what she was planning, but I had enough pieces to know it wouldn't end well for me if I sat back and did nothing. I've worked too hard to build what I have. I've spent nights with bloodshot eyes staring at spreadsheets, days running on bad coffee and worse takeout, all to get to a point where I could breathe without checking my bank account twice. And if she thought she could take half of that just because she decided she was done, she had another thing coming. So I made a decision, not the kind you announce, not the kind you even write down. This was going to be quiet, invisible, the kind of move that leaves no fingerprint. I called my mother under the guise of catching up and steered the conversation toward finances. I told her I needed her to hold some things for me. I didn't go into the whole story, no sense in dragging her into the drama, but she trusted me enough not to ask too many questions. Over the next few weeks, I shifted everything. The house, the business shares, the investments, even the savings account I'd been building for over a decade. It all went under her name. On paper, I went from being a man with assets to a man who technically owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a car that wasn't even worth bragging about. The beauty of it was in how ordinary it looked. No big wire transfers, no sudden account closures, just small, calculated steps that wouldn't make anyone look twice. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd think it was just routine financial housekeeping. By the time I was done, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: calm. Whatever storm she was brewing, it couldn't touch what I'd built now. And I wasn't about to tip her off. She still thought I was just the same old Michael, clueless and comfortable. The truth was, I was playing a whole different game now. And I was already 3 moves ahead. It's funny how people change when they believe they've already won. After I moved everything into my mother's name, something about her shifted. She seemed lighter, almost cheerful. The woman who had been distant and guarded for weeks suddenly started making casual conversation again. She'd ask about my day, laugh at the smallest things, even suggest we eat together like old times. If I didn't know better, I might have thought things were improving. But I knew better. This wasn't a return to love or connection, it was the smugness of someone who thought they were about to cash in on a plan they'd been quietly nurturing. She didn't realize she was standing on a trapdoor. I kept my face neutral, nodding in the right places, smiling just enough to keep up appearances. I didn't want her to suspect that anything had changed on my end. In her mind, I was still the same trusting husband who wouldn't see the knife until it was between my ribs. Inside, though, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Every time she smiled at me like she was in control, I wanted to laugh. I wasn't just a step ahead, I was already at the finish line, waiting for her to catch up and see the look on her face when she realized what had happened. The late nights out continued. The hushed phone calls didn't stop. Sometimes she'd even hum to herself while getting ready, like she was rehearsing for a new chapter of her life that didn't include me. I let her have her little fantasy. I even played into it by acting slightly more distracted than usual, just to make her think my guard was down. But every time I passed my mother's place and saw the paperwork locked safely in her desk, I felt that calm settle back over me. I wasn't worried anymore. Whatever she was planning, she could go ahead and finish it. I'd already made sure that when she finally pulled the trigger, she'd be firing blank. It happened on a Thursday, one of those ordinary days that didn't feel like it was going to hold any big surprises. I was at my desk, answering a few last emails, when I heard the front door open and close harder than usual. Her footsteps had a different rhythm that day, quick, sharp, with a kind of restless purpose. She didn't waste time on small talk. She went straight to the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing. There was no hesitation in her movements, no pausing to think about what to take. She already knew. It was rehearsed. The clothes went in neatly, the jewelry followed, and the bathroom drawers were emptied in practiced sweep. It was like watching someone who'd already done a trial run in their head a dozen times. I stood in the doorway for a moment, leaning casually against the frame. She didn't look at me. She was too focused, too determined, like a sprinter seeing the finish line. I didn't say a word. There was no point. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a scene. Within an hour, the suitcase was zipped, the smaller bags were slung over her shoulder, and she rolled that luggage out of the room as if she were heading for a long holiday. She walked past me with the faintest smile, the kind that says, "I've got everything I wanted." And that was the part that almost made me laugh. Because she didn't have everything she wanted. She didn't have anything. She left without slamming the door, which somehow made it feel colder than if she had. I heard the car start, then fade into the distance. The house was quiet again, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe without my chest tightening. I went into the kitchen, made myself a coffee, and sat down at the table with my phone. I knew she'd probably be in a lawyer's office within days. I also knew that those meetings weren't going to go the way she thought they would. And when she found out the truth, that's when the real game would begin. It didn't take long. A few days after she left, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she'd been spotted walking into a downtown law office. I could picture the scene without even being there, her sitting across from a well-dressed attorney, explaining in her most reasonable tone how she was ready to file for divorce and collect what she believed was her fair share. In her mind, it was going to be quick and clean. Half the house, half the business, a generous slice of the investment. The math was already done in her head. She probably even had plans for that money, maybe a new place, maybe a little luxury spree to celebrate her fresh start. What I wish I could have seen was the moment the lawyer opened the files, glanced through the records, and realized there was nothing. No property in my name. No business shares. No investment account. Nothing that could be touched. On paper, I was about as financially threatening as a man selling lemonade at the end of his driveway. I imagine her leaning in, confused, thinking there had to be some mistake. I imagined the lawyer explaining that, legally speaking, I didn't own anything worth fighting for. And I imagined that slow, creeping realization as it sank in. She'd left me thinking she was walking into a gold mine, but she'd actually stepped into an empty field. When the news reached me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even feel vindicated. What I felt was something stranger, a deep, quiet satisfaction, the kind that doesn't need applause. She had played her hand, thinking it was unbeatable, and lost without me ever having to move a single piece. Somewhere out there, she was trying to figure out how everything she thought she knew had slipped right through her fingers. And I knew it was only a matter of time before she came knocking. It was one of those slow, wet evenings where the rain falls steady and heavy, blurring everything outside the window into a watercolor painting. I was halfway through a quiet dinner when I heard it, a knock at the door, sharp and deliberate. I don't know why, but before I even opened it, I knew who it was. Some people you can sense through the wood and hinges. And there she was, standing on the porch, hair damp, jacket clinging to her shoulders, her expression a mix of exhaustion and forced softness. She smiled, not the old smile, but the kind people put on when they're trying to negotiate without words. She said she had been thinking, that maybe she'd made a mistake, that she wanted to talk. If I didn't know the real reason, maybe I could have believed her. But I knew. I knew she'd walked into that law office expecting a feast and walked out hungry. This wasn't about love or reconciliation. It was about loss, hers. I stood there, letting the rain fill the silence between us. It's strange how quickly a person can shift from someone you'd protect with your life to someone you wouldn't trust with your spare change. She looked around the doorway like she was peeking into a memory, but all I saw was someone calculating angles, looking for a way back in. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt, didn't give her clues about what I was thinking. In moments like that, silence is a far better weapon than words. And the more I let her speak, the more it became clear she wasn't here for me. She was here for what she thought she could still take. And I knew exactly how this conversation was going to end. I let her stand there, the rain tapping steadily against the porch roof, while I listened to her pour out carefully chosen words. She spoke as if she was trying to stitch something back together, but the thread she was using was too thin, too weak. Every sentence felt like a test, as though she was watching my face for signs that I might let her back in. But I didn't give her any. I kept my expression calm, almost bored, the way you look when someone is trying to sell you a product you already know is defective. Inside, I could see the cracks in her confidence widening with each passing second. She wasn't used to me being unreadable. There was a time when I would have fought for her. When I would have bent over backward to make things work, even if it meant tearing myself apart in the process. But that version of me had been replaced by someone who'd seen the truth, and the truth has a way of hardening you in places that used to be soft. The more she talked, the more I realized that she wasn't even trying to hide her real motive anymore. There were subtle hints in the way she asked about how the business was doing, how comfortable things must be for me financially. It was like watching someone circle a vault, pretending they were just admiring the door. I didn't argue. I didn't bring up the nights I suspected she was meeting someone else. I didn't list the signs I'd noticed or the calls I'd overheard. None of it mattered anymore. The most powerful thing I could do now was nothing. So I let the silence grow until it was almost uncomfortable. Then, without raising my voice, without giving her anything to work with, I stepped back just enough to make it clear that whatever she had come here for, she wasn't going to find it. Her eyes searched mine one last time, maybe looking for the man she thought she could still manipulate. But that man was gone. And in his place was someone who knew exactly what it meant to win without ever having to fight. She left without slamming the door. I closed it slowly behind her, the lock clicking into place with a sound that felt final. The house was quiet again. Not the strained, heavy quiet from before, but the kind that feels earned, the kind that settles in after you've taken the trash out and shut the lid for the last time. I walked through each room that night, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remember what my life felt like without the weight of someone else's hidden agenda pressing on it. The air seemed lighter. Even the tick of the old wall clock sounded less impatient, as if time itself had unclenched its fists. I knew she wasn't coming back, not really. Maybe she'd try again down the line, maybe she'd send some carefully crafted message in a few months, but it wouldn't matter. I'd already decided that my life would move forward without her. The door she had once walked through freely was now locked, and not just with a key, but with the knowledge of what she had tried to do. The best part was knowing I hadn't needed to shout, to fight, or to beg. I didn't have to tear myself down to prove a point. I had simply protected what was mine and let her own choices bury her. There's a certain beauty in winning like that, without noise, without spectacle, just quiet, irreversible victory. Some people think revenge has to be loud, full of fireworks and final speeches. But I've learned that the best kind is the one where you don't even have to lift a finger after the first move. You set the board, make your play, and let the other person realize too late that the game was over before they even sat down. Now my mornings are calm, my nights are peaceful, and the only drama I deal with is whether I should make coffee at home or grab one from the cafe down the street. The storms will come again, they always do, but when they do, I'll be ready. Because once you've learned how to survive someone else's plan for your downfall, you start living your life on your own terms, without apology. And that, more than anything, is the sweetest kind of ending. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel, thank you.